Where would we be next Christmas? I think much higher from here. I have a fourth quarter price target of $475,000 per Bitcoin. Quit making trades based on your emotion. Bitcoin is the world's greatest savings technology that the world has ever seen. In the history of humanity, there is no greater opportunity cost than to not own Bitcoin. Please start using it as your savings technology. Buy it, hold it, and if you just do this as hard as you can for 10 years, it will change your life. You're going to look up, it'll be Christmas of 2034. You'll be like, oh my goodness, I have optionality now. I could quit my job right now. I could retire. I could go be an artist. Instead of being a starving artist, you could be supported by Bitcoin. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually touch $1 million per Bitcoin this cycle. I think it's inevitable. I think that it absolutely is going to take over the world and become ubiquitous, like the way the internet has taken over the world and become ubiquitous. And now the internet is basically everywhere. Same as electricity. People used to not have electricity. Now most of the world has their houses and their businesses electrified.
Two popular Jeffs in the Bitcoin area, Jeff Booth and Jeff Ross.
we get mistaken all the time. I get letters saying that my book has impacted their lives. I'm like, I think you're talking about Jeff Booth. You're talking about, it's really funny. People think we're the same person often.
Really? With like a different last name?
Yeah. They just assume it's a popular Jeff in the Bitcoin space. So I don't do as many public appearances anymore. So that's been helpful. So they don't get us confused as much now.
But that's it. Like with the last name, I can understand it more. If you have the same name, obviously, then it would be real. But the same first name, that's interesting. But yeah, let's get started with that. Hi, Jeff. How are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
I'm doing really well, Robin. Thanks for having me on your show.
Really cool. And we don't record this on Christmas, so it's like 19th of December today, but I thought I will publish that on Christmas. So the first thing I just want to show here is the Bitcoin price chart on Christmas, because that was the only thing that I could relate to Christmas and show. I don't know, maybe you have something else that we can put in there for Christmas stuff. And I found one just table that we can look at the different price points at Christmas. I wasn't aware that we were that low actually. That's more than a 2x from last year's Christmas, and 2022 was like with 16K. That was kind of the lowest point. How do you look at that, and maybe give us some of your outlooks for what we can await for till next Christmas?
Yeah, so I think that's very telling. I like looking at end of year type things, so Christmas is a great date to look at. When I look at these prices, all I see are the 4-year price cycles and the big M2 surges in there that peak basically in 2013 and then again in 2017, 2021. And then I think we're going to probably get the next one in 2025, where we're going to get another 2025. So another surge as we head into this next year. So, we're right where we are. Before I nuked my Twitter X account, I had posted lots of things. I like to make little predictions, just not to to flex or not to give anybody any type of investment advice or anything like that. It's just for me to sort of keep a diary of my running thoughts as I study things and look at the Bitcoin cycle and look at macro conditions and things like that. My assessment, at least a year and 2 years ago, was that by Christmas of 2024, so right about where we are now, is that the price of Bitcoin would be between $100,000 and $125,000. And so that's about where we are. We've kind of hit my targets. We may have peaked already for the year at about 108,000. And the reason I say that is because the dollar is very strong. And when the dollar is too strong, that makes it very hard for risk assets to perform well, makes it hard for Bitcoin to perform well. But who knows? We may still get a run into the end of the year up to closer to 120 or 125. It wouldn't surprise me either way. But yeah, so where would we be next Christmas? I think much higher from here. I have a fourth quarter price target of $475,000 per Bitcoin. I've been saying that for a couple of years. Nothing has changed. I still have that same target. But I wouldn't be, and again, not me flexing, not me making some incredible prediction. I don't know the future. I think the range could be anywhere between 200K and $1 million. It might even pop above $1 million. But to me, that around 475 makes the most sense. So I'm still sticking with that target until something changes.
Yeah, it's still a pretty bullish target, because I keep asking people, and the things that I hear is like 250, 350K. That's kind of the consensus that I hear most people say. Like 450K is not that far away from 350K, but it's the current price on that above there. Really interesting. You said one thing that I just want to quickly touch on. You said like a risk asset with Bitcoin. It's funny, because for me, Bitcoin is completely a risk off asset, and I feel also you see it like that, but it's still categorized as a risk asset. Risk meaning volatility in those eyes, right?
Yes. So yeah, it's a popular thing I like to say all the time is risk only equals volatility in academia. So I got my MBA in finance, right? And so all the financial professors will tell you that the way to measure risk is to look at volatility of an asset. And I think that's very misleading. I think, even when this was first drubbed up as a solution decades ago of how can you quantify risk in a stock, even then, the sort of founders of the idea didn't like that. They didn't think that was a very great measurement, but it was kind of the best thing that they came up with. But then it stuck. Like everything in academics, things stick even if they don't make a lot of sense in the real world. I tell people the only true financial risk is the chance of losing your purchasing power over time. And so what's ironic about that is that makes Bitcoin extremely unrisky. To your point, you and I both, I view Bitcoin as almost essentially risk free, even though it's very volatile. I think something that people don't think is risky, but is very risky, is the US dollar. If you hold dollars or you hold US treasuries, which are considered the risk free asset for the world, you are guaranteed to lose your purchasing power over time. The longer you hold the dollar, the more guaranteed you are that you will lose your purchasing power. That's very risky to me, even though it's not volatile at all. It's really stupid and very risky. So, as a hedge fund manager, I would never hold dollars for the long term. I would never hold treasuries for the long term, only for a very short term. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my client's purchasing power over time, and that's really stupid.
Which is a funny thing, because I have a lot of normie friends, even my sister, they kind of don't want to invest at all, because they feel like, oh, the euro is that safe thing, and everything outside, I have a risk of losing my money, because they denominate everything in euros, and they're like, if I go out of euros, I might lose my euros. But they're not looking at the purchasing power. They're just looking at the euros of the nominal things. That's
Exactly.
something I get enraged if I encounter such a conversation.
Right, right. And so case in point, one of the things I used to publish on Twitter all the time. Now I publish it over on Nostr. Is every month the Federal Reserve updates their site. I don't care a lot for a lot of their data, but one of the funny things they have is a page called "Buying Eggs with Bitcoins," and they literally publish this. So I publish the updated results every month, and what that shows is, well, let me start back. They started this in 2015 to show that, even though Bitcoin, everybody was excited about it at the time, it's way too volatile to use as a unit of account and as a medium of exchange. And we're going to sort of prove that to the world. So they have two charts on that page. The first one is the price of eggs, a dozen eggs in US dollar terms. And then if you go below that, if you scroll below, there's the price of a dozen eggs in Bitcoin terms or Satoshis. What's hilarious about that, and we can all predict what actually happened, is what it shows is the price of eggs in the United States just keeps going up and up and up, and the price of eggs in Bitcoin terms goes down and down and down. And so what I like to do is I'll post rolling 5-year averages. So looking back 5 years, how has the world changed? How has our grocery bill changed over the last 5 years, which is a good proxy for eggs. Or eggs is a good proxy for our grocery bill in general. You can do this with other foods too, like beef I'll do sometimes, and other things. But basically what it shows is over the last 5 years, our grocery bills have actually gone up about 2.5 times. And in the last, access denied, and in the last 5 years, the price of groceries in Bitcoin terms, or in this case, the price of eggs, has gone down by more than 50%. So the grocery bill has been more than cut in half if you're on a Bitcoin standard. So again, that's to your point, right? If for people who are scared of losing their dollars or losing their euros, you will keep your euros if you keep it in a bank account, or if you keep them hidden in your house somewhere. But the value, the purchasing power of those euros and of those dollars will drastically decrease, and you'll be able to buy less and less over time. So it's really foolish to just sit in dollars or sit in euros or any government fiat currency over the long run.
That's super interesting. By the way, the site that I pulled up, it's the right side, but I was on there for a minute. I saw the charts and then it said access denied. So I tried it in a different browser. It did the same thing. I don't know why I cannot access
That's funny.
that chart. But yeah, maybe because I'm not in the US. I don't know if they have some weird rule like that. But yeah, definitely the site, if you want to check it out, it was shortly in the video, so you can go. If they don't deny you the access, it should be the right site. It feels like the only real risk to Bitcoin is a user error. Like if you lose your Bitcoin, like that's the biggest risk that I see in Bitcoin.
Definitely. I agree with that too. We all know stories of people who, especially in the early days, right? Bitcoin used to not be worth that much. When I first got into Bitcoin and started buying it, it was about $500 per Bitcoin. So it was worth, I thought I was late then, by the way, I missed it. It's already up to $500. I know people, I think Max Kaiser is a good example. He was buying between like $1 and $5 per Bitcoin. So a lot of people used to just give Bitcoin away. There were Bitcoin faucets where you would just sign up and you would get free Bitcoin just for doing nothing. And so people didn't take that kind of stuff very seriously. So they would just collect it somewhere. They maybe had 10 Bitcoin, which was worth $10 or something. And then they didn't take it very seriously. So maybe they lost that device where they had the Bitcoin on, or they didn't take it seriously about, how to protect their Bitcoin, or when they sent it, they put the wrong address in and didn't really care because, whatever, I only lost 30 Bitcoin. Who cares? Right now, that would be a fortune, right? And so they make mistakes. So people now, I think, are seeing and learning from people in the past and past mistakes is you need to be really careful with how you store your Bitcoin. You need to be careful to not leave it on exchanges in any large amount, because that can get fished away from you, or something can happen to the exchange and you can lose it all. Or if you send it to the wrong address, there's no customer service number to call. It's gone. So you got to make sure you're sending it to the right place. It's pretty easy to do these days with cut and paste, and there are methods to make sure you're doing things correctly. But yeah, you have to be extremely careful, and that's what older people have a harder time with Bitcoin, is they think they can call the customer service department and help, and that'll help them recover their lost Bitcoin. But that's just not how it works.
100%. And I made some videos around that. I even had Rick, I don't know if you know him, Rick Massett, who lost the 25 Bitcoins, famously on the show, explain what he did wrong, because he had self-custody. He knew it. He was not that old. So it was like all those things, but he still lost it. And I think it was a wake-up call for a lot of people. You mentioned being late, and I hear that all the time, especially now because we're over 100K. And I feel like people from the outside that don't really understand Bitcoin, they always see those milestones as a natural top. They're like looking at 10,000, they're like, okay, now it topped out and it reached its potential. 100,000, it reached a potential there. What do you say to people that say, oh, I'm too late? Or do you have a number where you're like, okay, at that point you might be actually a little bit late to Bitcoin?
It depends on your time frame. So if you have a long enough time frame, and I say greater, basically 3 years or more, and most people say 4 years, but I like to use 3 years, because it generally takes about 3 years for the current liquidity cycle peak, when we have this big wave and the price goes exponential for a year, which I expect to happen in 2025, like happened in 2021 and 2017 and 2013 and even 2011. It takes about 3 years usually to get back to that peak price. So it will be a painful 3 years if you buy at the peak, right? Like I still remember people buying at the 2017 peak. It was about 20,000 or 18,000, right around that range. People were FOMOing in and putting all this money, and they finally believe in Bitcoin and they put all their money into Bitcoin. And then they had a very painful 3 years while they watched the price go from 20 all the way down to 3,000. And then it took years and years. And I think it was about December of 2020 until the price finally got back above or to that 20,000 level again. And then we got the news that I think Tesla was buying Bitcoin, and then it spiked in early January and started popping off. if you have a time horizon of at least 3 years, or you can say 4 to 5 years, I tell people you should have a 10-year minimum time frame to just buy and hold. I tell everybody the exact same advice, all my friends, family. Don't look at the price. Just buy Bitcoin, dollar cost average into Bitcoin, or anytime you get an influx of cash or a paycheck, just buy Bitcoin, whatever the price is, because I can basically guarantee that 10 years from now, it will be a lot higher than it is right now. And if you start dollar cost averaging now, even if you pick the perfect worst timing, if you get the absolute tippy top of the 2025 peak, and maybe you get my thing of 475,000, or maybe it's $1,000,000. If you are unlucky enough to get that exact top, first of all, it's a badge of honor to buy the peak. I think I like to try to buy peaks too. Michael Saylor talks about buying the peak, and I just think we're going to be buying the peaks forever because it just keeps going up. You may have, though, if you ape in right at the peak, you're going to have 3 painful years while it drops way down 70 or 80% or so, and then starts to creep higher again. And then you'll be justified 3 to 4 years later. But I tell people, like, don't worry about that price. Have a 10-year time horizon. So if you're starting today, you're watching this video, this is going to be released on Christmas. If it's Christmas 2024, say, okay, I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to stack sats. Whenever I can, I'm going to dollar cost average into it, and I'm going to do it for 10 years. So I'm not going to look at the price until 2034. And I tell people, if you do that, and they think I'm kidding, but I'm not. I used to be an investment advisor. I used to work with people's retirement accounts. Everybody does this, at least in the US, with their retirement accounts. They think I got to just stack, stocks and bonds and whatever nonsense for 30 to 40 years, and then hopefully I'll get to retire at the end. I tell people with Bitcoin, because of its incredible annualized rate of return, if you just do this as hard as you can for 10 years, it will change your life. You're going to look up, it'll be Christmas of 2034. And you'll be like, oh my goodness, I have optionality now. I could possibly quit my job right now. I could retire. I could go be an artist. Instead of being a starving artist, you could be supported by Bitcoin. There's all these things you can do now because you'll have way more financial freedom. But you have to actually do that. What usually happens, I will tell you, is right about now in this cycle, part of the bull market, people start reaching out to me again. They know I'm the crazy Bitcoin guy, right? Everybody thinks of us as the crazy Bitcoin person. It's exactly how it was in the 1990s with the internet. Everybody had a crazy internet person that thought internet was going to change the world. So it's the crazy Bitcoin person, and they'll all reach out and I'll tell them this exact same advice. Don't look at the price, just buy it for 10 years. But what everybody does is they ape into it right, somewhere in the bull market, and then it drops 70%, and then they panic and they sell everything at the bottom. I literally have friends and family members who sold Bitcoin when it was like $20,000 and $18,000 back just in the last bear market in 2022. And I'm just like, don't do that. That's exactly what you're not supposed to do, right? You're supposed to buy low and sell high, and you did exactly the opposite of that. And so anyways, I digress because I've been sort of emotionally scarred from this, from lots of friends and family members over the years. But I just can't emphasize enough how critical it is to quit doing that, to quit making trades based on your emotion. Bitcoin is the world's greatest savings technology that the world has ever seen. The biggest opportunity cost in the world, and I mean this, in the history of humanity, there is no greater opportunity cost than to not own Bitcoin over the long run. And so please start using it as your savings technology. Buy it, hold it, and quit trying to be a trader and quit trying to be a hero. And if you do that for 10 years, it will change your life. That's sort of my personal guarantee to people.
I love that message because I had so many people reach out to the 100K, not so many, but a good amount of people reach out to around the 100K, even like at 90K, 85K. They're like, oh yeah, I sold 20% of them. And they had like, oh, like I want to buy back lower because I'm not satisfied with my Bitcoin stack. And I'm like, yeah, good luck, because maybe it never goes back down to that levels. Like we don't know where it goes down. It has a correction, but we don't know if the correction goes back down to 50K, or maybe it goes down to 150K or 200K. We don't know that. That's super interesting. Another interesting thing is the retirement topic. I just know that retirement is a super popular topic within the Bitcoin community, just because every time I put retirement in the title, it just clicked more. So that's kind of where I see data of like, okay, those words, those topics seem to be more popular. And a lot of people also ask me like, okay, if I want to retire on Bitcoin and I want that strategy, like what do I have to do? And I think that 10-year time horizon is a really good one, because 10 years is kind of hard to not be really successful in Bitcoin when you have like a middle class job, you're like an average person, and you can set aside a little bit every month. It's really hard to not be successful with a 10-year DCAing strategy when you don't get distracted by higher prices or fiat out at lower prices. Both happen a lot. I like that retirement strategy of like putting your head down 10 years, falling for it. Do you have some framework around retirement of like, okay, that you can look at, like that Bitcoin stack you have to reach? Obviously, it depends on the personal situation, but do you have some framework around that?
So yeah, so that's a really important point, and everybody says that, and it's not just because we're hedging or being intentionally vague. It's because it really is different for everybody, right? It's if you live in the Midwest of the United States in a small town that's super cheap in a dirt cheap house, and you're a single person, your cost of living is very, very low. If you live in Manhattan and you have a family of 4 kids and a wife, your cost of living is extremely high, and it's like that we can all figure out examples all around the world. So it does vary extremely with people. I also will say that it also depends on how serious you take this. So if people put 1% of their paycheck, each paycheck, and dollar cost average over 10 years, they're gonna have success after 10 years, but it might not be as incredible as you think. Versus if you put, say, 10% of your paycheck or 20%. I tell people, and people think I'm crazy, I tell people you should learn to live off of 60 or 70% of your take-home pay and put the other 30 to 40% into Bitcoin and or other investments if you want to, right? Stocks and other kind of things. But I think Bitcoin is the primary thing. So what I tell even my own kids, and we're Christians, so I say, okay, you give the first 10% back to God, you learn to live off the other 60%, and then that other 30%, you just put in Bitcoin and you don't think about it and live off that. And what you're doing is you're paying your future self. So you pay yourself second. Pay God first, pay yourself second, and then you live off the rest of that. And if you can just develop those habits over time, and as your salary increases slowly over time because your skill level increases and your station increases, that 60% will become a meaningful amount. But that 30% that you're saving and getting serious about saving will have a massive impact on your future self. And you'll be in a spot of financial optionality much earlier than your peers if you do something like that. So that's what I tell people. Get serious about it. You can dip your toes in the water. Like even when I first started, it was with teeny tiny little amounts that I would buy Bitcoin with. And then I gambled in crypto, proof of stake crypto nonsense. I got attracted by all that back in 2016, 2017, which was like the dumbest thing I've ever done. Learned a lot from it. I became a hardcore Bitcoiner after that in 2018, 2019. And so I tell everybody to just avoid the shiny objects, avoid all these other things you see, because they have nothing relevant to do at all with Bitcoin, and they're not here to stay. Bitcoin is built to last. These things are not built to last. They have nothing to do with Bitcoin. Anyways, that's a whole side subject. But I just tell people, this more serious you take this and the more diligence you have in performing this, the better your outcome will be, and the quicker your good outcome will be. But you have to take it seriously for a good chunk of time.
Yeah, it feels like the early Bitcoiners went through that altcoin and shitcoin phase, but I honestly see a lot of Bitcoiners that come into 2023 and 2024 into Bitcoin. They usually don't have that altcoin phase. It's really fascinating. Maybe we come to a point where the educational material, the podcast, the books, the speakers, everything around that is now at a level where when someone researched that, it's really clear that Bitcoin is not crypto and Bitcoin is kind of the something completely different, and you really want to be here. Maybe we come to a point where we kind of are not distracted away from altcoins and shiny objects. It's almost like MicroStrategy and other things are now distracting from Bitcoin self-custody, but it's still Bitcoin, so it's not distracting from Bitcoin itself. Yeah, it's really interesting time to be in the Bitcoin cycle. I hope we can continue. I hope that's not just a subjective feeling with my Bitcoin bubble.
I hope so, but I got to tell you that the one huge downside of the incoming administration in the United States with Trump and the people who are coming on board, they are pro crypto, not just pro Bitcoin. I'm concerned that we're going to have a whole nother huge crypto circus and rug pull cycle again, unfortunately. I mean, Trump has his own coin, right? I mean, they have their own meme coins. It's just nonsense. But I think, to your point, we've been working very hard as educators in the space to distinguish proof of work Bitcoin is decentralized, secure, neutral energy money for the world. It's an open source money for the world. It's a better money for a better world. Proof of stake crypto, they used to talk about that, right? Ethereum used to talk about being ultrasound money. You'll notice you don't ever hear people talking about that again. I think it's because Vitalik Buterin was like, I don't want to be the CEO of something that says that it's ultrasound money as a competitor to the dollar. The Department of Justice will rain down on them, and the U.S. dollar system does not like competitors. The thing that's amazing about Bitcoin is it can't be stopped. It's a sly roundabout way around the US dollar. All of these proof of stake cryptocurrencies are just these goofy things that are there's no possible way. There's literally a 0% chance that they will become money for the world. Right? They're not designed to be like that. They're jokes. They're meant to be gambled on and speculated upon. And you can do little things with some of them that may have value over time, like maybe putting stocks on a blockchain so that you can trade stocks 24/7, 365 all around the world. That's a legitimate use case, I think. And I could see that taking off. I think stablecoins have a legitimate use case. To me, the stablecoin system is just basically the Eurodollar system that's expanding throughout the world because people desperately want access to better currencies than their government currencies. The US dollar is clearly the best fiat currency in the world relative to other government fiat currencies, is how I look at it. And so that's why there's such a huge draw and enticement for these stablecoins. So anyways, that's a whole different subject, but none of those things are vying with Bitcoin to be the world's decentralized, secure, neutral energy money for the world. It's like the invention is so profound. It's like the invention of the internet, or like the invention of electricity, or the internal combustion engine. It's this incredible new technology that's going to totally reshape the world and put the world on a different path. So proof of stake crypto does not offer that. That's only for speculative nonsense.
I put it that way. Altcoins will only survive if they comply and work with the government operations. Stable coins, they will only be allowed if the government is in those stable coins.
Yes.
And also the stock market will only be long-term successful if the government and the SEC and all those institutions say, yeah, we want it 24/7 to be reachable, and they can be on there. And that's kind of how I look at that. And I'm like, I don't want to be involved with that.
Yeah, exactly. And who would, right? I mean, even if you do have access to it, that's great. But especially for Europeans and Americans and most Western nations, it's just still the dollar, right? Even though it's a digital dollar, it's still guaranteed to lose purchasing power over time. With these stablecoin options, they're similar to CBDCs, so I could see the government sort of marketing them as, yeah, we're not doing CBDCs, we're doing this stablecoin over here. They're still programmable. There's still a way to invade your privacy. They're still not permissionless like Bitcoin is. There's all of the downsides of government fiat currency is in those stable coins. So anyways, we're sort of digressing here, but I just think they have nothing relevant to do with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is better money in every way than these other options. So I just tell people, and I know you do too, like, just quit wasting your time with those things. You're going to get wrecked at some point. It's just not worth it. Just stack Bitcoin, stack it hard for 10 years, and it will change your life over that 10-year time period.
Absolutely, be focused. One other thing that you said that was really interesting with Trump and the new administration, we had Trump on Bitcoin Nashville, it was, saying crypto, have fun playing with your Bitcoin. That was kind of the popular things. Then we had Eric Trump actually in Abu Dhabi speaking. I didn't saw the speech on the main stage. I only saw the speech that he gave in the Vale area. And basically he said, mostly crypto, not Bitcoin. He said blockchain is an exciting technology, all those things. So like typical altcoin crypto things that he actually said. How do you look at the general thing of Trump getting into office, being pro crypto, pro Bitcoin. Many made the argument that Kamala Harris might have been a better choice even for Bitcoin because she brings more chaos in and maybe harder rules to crypto.
Yeah, and not only Kamala, but Gary Gensler. He was, I think, he was okay for Bitcoin, and he was very anti proof of stake crypto. And I kind of liked it, honestly. I know the crypto community hated him, but from a Bitcoin perspective, I was like, yeah, he's kind of he sees the difference between the two for sure. So there are pros and cons, right? I think that this speculative nature of this cycle, because of the Trump administration and because of their pro-crypto stances, I thought we might see the death of proof-of-stake crypto because of Gary Gensler and the last administration. I was wrong. That was probably my major thing I got wrong. I was right that the SEC brought about a ton of lawsuits against proof-of-stake crypto exchanges and the currencies themselves, and they lost. They got smacked down by the courts. I was surprised by that. I thought they would be more effective. I thought we might not see another crypto cycle. But I've gone 180 on that now. Now that Trump is on board, and now that we have a not just pro Bitcoin, but also a pro crypto administration, it's going to be a circus, I think. And so I think we are going to see people get distracted, and they're going to be like, well, that's great. I can maybe, 5x my money in Bitcoin this year, but what if I 20x'd it because I bought this dog coin or bought, whatever goofy coin of the day is popular. I don't know. It's very frustrating to me, but again, okay. So I'll say one more thing. I'm a libertarian. I believe I'm a freedom maxi above all. If people want to speculate in garbage and do that kind of stuff, go for it. It's your life. You do what you want, right? As long as you're not harming other people. That's kind of my take. I say speculate in whatever you want, but make sure to save in Bitcoin. As long as people in their minds, and this to me is the most important thing as kind of an educator in this space, as long as people understand that proof of stake crypto has nothing relevant to do with proof of work Bitcoin, that's fine. You can invest in stocks, bonds, gold, cryptocurrencies, whatever, meme stocks, fine. But just understand that you're speculating and you can go to zero doing that. But the only way to truly save is to build your Satoshi stack, right? To save in Bitcoin. That's how you truly save for a better tomorrow for yourself and your family.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. Interesting. One more thing that I want to cover with the Trump thing was, I don't know how it's in America. I just know in Europe and especially Austria, but I think whole Europe is the same ways. Everyone in the mainstream media covers Bitcoin the same way. Yeah, Bitcoin hit now 100K in euros, 100K in dollars, and it's because Trump got elected. And it's so frustrating because they give Bitcoin like 1 minute airtime on the like non-financial things, and they just say like, oh, price rips, and Trump is the reason for that. First of all, is that in America the same way? And more interesting, do you think Trump actually has something to do with that price rip, or would have that happened probably anyways, or maybe later or something like that? How do you look at that?
Well, like I said, a year and 2 years ago, I was saying that the price of Bitcoin I thought would be between 100 and 125,000 by Christmas of 2024, and here we are. And I think what happens is most people don't understand how the financial world really works. They don't understand macro, and so they think it's all voodoo. They think you can't predict what's going to happen with asset prices. You can't predict what the Federal Reserve is going to do with rate cuts and things like that. But it turns out you can. And it turns out what most people want is narratives to explain what's going on. And so, and then on top of it, it's not helping because Trump actually takes credit for the price of Bitcoin pumping, right? And this is what he did last time. He took credit for the stock market. Every time the stock market would go higher, he'd be like, I did this. Thank me. He's very narcissistic. He's incredibly narcissistic. Love him or hate him, he's very narcissistic. He's very entertaining too. And so I think we're going to see a lot of that, especially in 2025. And then what you'll notice, though, so say we get a bear market because of liquidity conditions around the world and a peaking economic cycle that then rolls over and starts to go in the wrong direction. At that point, if that happens, we're going to see another bear market in stocks and especially in Bitcoin and especially in proof of stake crypto. So people are going to lose 99 to 100% of their gains if they don't, take profits. But what will be absent, and I can predict this with a lot of confidence, is Trump will not take credit for that. He will not say, "I'm the reason Bitcoin is dropping. I'm the reason the economy is turning south. I'm the reason that crypto is getting crushed right now by 90 to 100%." He doesn't take credit on the downsides. He only takes credit on the upsides.
Will be fun in 2026 to see that happening if that happens. In 2021 we had also an interesting cycle because I feel like the cycle top was kind of suppressed by China, by Elon Musk pumping and then dumping it again, and some smaller other factors like FTX and things like that. And a lot of people I heard that many times now where, okay, we got a suppressed 2021 and it probably could have reached 100K even in 2021, but it didn't. And now maybe the next top will overcorrect and will shoot out of the moon in that saying. Is that something that you're looking at, that this next cycle will be completely crazy, as it seems to be? There's no real negative news, like the government is on top and stuff like that?
Yeah, so that's generally my take as well, is that I just what you said. I think 2021 was an anomaly. I think that the ban from China of banning all Bitcoin miners was a real, true black swan event for the Bitcoin network. It's hard to beat down the Bitcoin network, but it did. The hash rate dropped 50% in a month. That was incredible. And all of those miners, it used to be centered, the Bitcoin mining used to be centered in China. And then they banned it. And then all of those miners had to quickly sell all of their Bitcoin. So they flooded the market. It drove the price lower, much lower. And that was right in the heart of the bull market. And so Bitcoin made an effort to try to get back up to a new peak, and it did. It reached a new high of about 69,000. But I think it would have been much higher if that China event would not have happened. And then second, because as you say, FTX and these other exchanges were hoodwinking people into thinking they were buying Bitcoin, but they actually weren't. So that was a price suppressant as well. I do so because of that, and because I think 2021 was an anomaly. I don't believe in the diminished cycle peak theory. That is very prominent and is catching on. I think that's the general belief, is that that's real. There are a lot of prominent people who speak of that. So because of that, they think the next high will be somewhere in the 150 to 250,000 range. We'll see. Maybe they're right. I don't think so. And that's what I've been saying, again, to your point, that if there are any surprises this cycle, it will be a surprise to the upside. So I think that with the way everything is going, and given that I think it was a fluke last time, I think it's very reasonable to think we get above 300,000 at 475. Like I said, like I said at the beginning, I wouldn't be surprised if we actually touch $1 million per Bitcoin this cycle. I don't think it's likely. I want to make that very clear. I'm not predicting $1 million. I think there's maybe like a 1 or 2% chance it gets that high, but it could get that high, barring anything. And for me, the most important thing I look at is what is the business cycle doing and what is the liquidity cycle doing, because those are actually what drive the prices of stocks and especially of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the great absorber of liquidity. And so if liquidity is flush and really screaming into the system, a couple things, it could actually extend this cycle. So it doesn't necessarily have to end at the end of 2025. There's no magic rule that says you have to keep doing these perfect 4-year cycles. It could go into 2026. It could go into 2028. That's another thing from a macro perspective. I still think, and I've been saying this for a couple of years, that the current conditions are most similar to the mid-1990s. In the mid-1990s, the Federal Reserve had the Fed funds rate high. They started to lower the Fed funds rate, and then they actually went back up again. And then what happened is the problem with the late 1990s is the economy was so strong that the Fed was actually trying to slow it down a bit towards the end, but we didn't have a recession that everybody thought we were going to have. They had a scare with the long-term capital crisis, and the Asian financial markets crisis was about 1998 or so. But then we were flooded with more liquidity, and we had that huge blow off top in the dot-com stocks from basically 1998 to 2000. Nobody could believe it. It was just incredible. It just kept going higher and higher. Everybody was shorting it. Everybody who was shorting it got their faces ripped off. It was a very difficult time for people. So I actually think if there ever were a time where it's possible to have that current setup again, it's right now. People are still calling for a recession. They were calling for it in 2023. They were calling for it in 2024. They're still calling for it in 2025. And I think they're completely wrong. I call them the recessionistas. They've been wrong for 2 years, and they're going to be wrong for 3 years. And I think with the pro-growth policies that are coming on board, with where we are in the early stages of a recovering economic cycle, which is where we are right now here in the U.S., and then even so Europe is, as you know, Europe is really struggling right now with stagflation, and China is really struggling with stagflation. What that means to me is that Europe and China are going to lead the way with liquidity at some point, and it will be basically once the U.S. dollar breaks lower, because the dollar has been screaming higher for the last 2.5 months. At some point, the dollar will break, similar to what happened back in late 2016, early 2017. Ironically, the last time Trump was elected, the dollar spiked into the end of the year, and then it weakened for all of 2017. I think we're going to have exactly the same thing this time around as well, almost exactly. And I think we're going to get a flood of liquidity once that happens from China, from the European Union, and that is going to provide the stimulus that's going to help propel the price of Bitcoin much higher and possibly elongate this business cycle in comparison to past cycles.
What do you mean with business cycle and liquidity cycle? I never heard those words.
Oh, okay. So yeah, they're different things. So the way that so now we're getting deep into the weeds with macro. So basically, what happens is back in 2008. The Federal Reserve took control of the markets from the free market economy that we kind of had back then. It was partially centrally controlled. It became totally centrally controlled after 2008, the crisis. They just flooded the markets with liquidity, right? So quantitative easing happened. So what they said is, what we're going to do is we're going to take all of the treasuries off of the market, and we're going to strongly encourage the institutional investors, the big banks, investment banks, things like that, and then even retail investors to move further out on the risk curve. So instead of just buying treasuries and sitting in cash, we're going to force you to go further out on the risk curve to buy stocks and risk assets, which, like we talked about earlier, so Bitcoin is considered a risk asset by lots of market participants, even though we consider it as the world's safest asset. And when they do that, that causes this big push in prices higher. That usually precedes the business cycle of an economy by about 12 months or so. So first, what we see is this flood of liquidity, and then the economic cycle bottoms and then starts to turn higher. So basically, you can see that through PMI. So what is the manufacturing sector of a country doing? What is the services sector doing? That starts to turn higher. So in the United States, even though lots of prominent people are calling for a recession, actually we're at the early stages of a recovery. And if you look at things like new orders and expectations, they are shooting higher right now. So I expect 2025 to show the economic cycle to start increasing. We're going to see economic growth, so GDP acceleration and inflation acceleration, but not in a scary, terrible way like it was back in 2022. We're going to see just a kind of a little bit higher trend. When you have increasing economic growth and accelerating low levels of inflation and central banks that are supplying liquidity also, that is very good for risk assets. So that's why I look at 2025 and I look ahead for the full year, and I don't see anything, barring a black swan event, I don't see anything really stopping that cycle. I think in general, we're going to see growth, and we're going to see a mildly increased inflation, and we're going to see generally supportive central banks. We're going to see very supportive central banks in the Europe and in China, even because they have more stagflationary conditions. So they're going to try to to juice the markets as much as they can by doing things like quantitative easing and loosening financial conditions as much as they can. And all of that stuff eventually flows into risk assets and eventually flows into Bitcoin. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's also interesting, as I said before, with the blow off top that we had in the internet cycle in 2000 with the .com bubble. And I really like those comparisons between the internet adoption and Bitcoin adoption. Unfortunately, we didn't have an internet token that was underlying everything and showing the price of it. That's really interesting to have in Bitcoin, because you kind of can track all the things. Of course, you can track how did Microsoft or Amazon or Apple do in those times, and you kind of have an idea. But you can also imagine, so you're saying that blow off top, the same .com bubble thing, you could imagine in the Bitcoin scene for the next years. Would that then also mean that we have that massive drop down, and maybe that's the vanishing point of those cryptos then also?
So that's the kind of stuff I watch for. So what I will be concerned about is I expect the economy, especially based in the US, and then the United States pulls the other major economies along. So eventually the EU and eventually China and even Japan will start to also do better from an economic perspective. They'll lag the US, but they'll get pulled out of the mud and start to perform better. What I expect to see is that the economy, especially with Trump-related policies, right? He's all about just juicing the economy. And if he has a Senate and a House that are on his side, at least for the first 2 years, they will juice the economy. They'll do everything they can to make it run very hot. And he doesn't care. He doesn't care about the fact that we have to pay the piper later. He just wants it to be juiced while he's in office. So what I'll be watching for is, at some point, if the economy gets overheated, if GDP growth is kind of off the charts, stocks are at historic I believe they will be historically expensive. They already are expensive. They're going to get even more expensive over the next year or more. So what happens then is central banks then, they say, look, the economy is getting too hot. We need to do things to slow that down. We're going to see inflation starting to run hot as well, and everything to get very, very overpriced, the housing market to get overpriced. It's very bad for people who don't own assets, right? I talk about a lot the owner class and the renter class. The owner class has been doing awesome since 2009. Ever since this whole stimulative central bank cohesive effort. When they do that, basically, if you own any assets, you do very, very well. If you're the renter class, the only thing that happens is life gets more and more expensive, and you have to work more and more jobs just to pay your bills, to buy groceries and to have a car and things like that. It's tragic, and it's terrible income inequality, and that's directly related to the fiat currency system and the Keynesian economic system. It's the expansion of credit. And so if you're borrowing money, you get crushed by the expansion of credit. But if you own assets, you benefit from the expansion of credit. But that's another different subject too. So what I'll be watching for is somewhere maybe at the end of 2025, once the Federal Reserve starts saying things like the economy is getting overheated, we need to slow things down. At that point, they'll talk about raising the federal funds rate, because when you raise rates, it makes those short-term interest rates more expensive. So small business owners who have variable rate debt, Americans with HELOCs, home equity lines of credit, those kind of things, those are variable rate debts. That's directly tied to the federal funds rate. So the federal funds rate, as that increases, that means it gets more expensive for them to pay their debt off. And so that's one of the tools they use to kind of help slow down the economy. They would also do more quantitative tightening, which is actually what the Fed is doing right now. They're letting balances roll off of they're letting assets like treasuries and mortgage-backed securities roll off of their balance sheet. They're not buying them actively on the open market. That's considered quantitative tightening. So I would expect more of that. First, I think we're going to see them expand it again in 2025. But at some point, when things get overheated, they'll switch that again, and they'll start letting those assets roll off again. And when they let those assets roll off, that tells people to move back on the risk curve to more. It forces banks and institutional investors and things to buy treasuries instead of to be further out on the risk curve. So it's kind of confusing, but those are the kind of things as a hedge fund manager that I follow very closely. As I look, what's the economic cycle doing? What is the liquidity cycle doing? Are the central banks now starting to talk about slowing down the economy? If they do that, and if they succeed, that's usually when we see kind of a deflationary bust and we see these major recessions happen. Where we are today, Christmas 2024, none of those things are in place right now. It's the exact opposite. Things are looking good. The business cycle has bottomed and is starting to look better. I think central banks are going to be more supportive of markets. I think it's very bullish for risk assets, and it's extremely bullish for Bitcoin and for the next 12 months or so.
I'm wondering all the time, like when the public will no longer see Bitcoin as a risk asset, probably when Bitcoin gets boring and it kind of has no volatility anymore.
Right.
But yeah, I do agree with you. Basically, what you said before, it was amazing. The diminishing returns, I don't buy it either. Like that doesn't make sense from any standpoint when you see Bitcoin. And I think most people cannot comprehend the mind around that asset being actually capped at 21 million. I think that's like, it's digital, it's globally available, it's the 21 million. You cannot make more of it, even if everyone wants it, and 8 billion people have an incentive to join that network. That's just really, really big. You touched on it a little bit. What happens when Bitcoin, and I want to shift a little bit of a gear, what happens when Bitcoin actually gets to a mass market and it really triggers in the whole market, and everyone kind of gets it more and more? So not we have like very small asset now. What if we have 50%, 60% have a direct exposure or indirect exposure to Bitcoin? What will be the impact of Bitcoin on society, on the world, on the financial markets?
Well, first of all, I think it's inevitable. I think that it absolutely is going to take over the world and become ubiquitous. When I say take over, I don't mean that in an ominous way. I mean like the way the internet has taken over the world and become ubiquitous, and now the internet is basically everywhere. Same as electricity. People used to not have electricity. Now most of the world has their houses and their businesses electrified. You have access to electricity. It's a technology like that. Most people still don't understand that. They're very confused by that, but that's what it is. It's a superior monetary technology that is starting out small, and then it will follow that S-shaped curve of adoption, which, by the way, is the same thing as a power law scale. So it's following that adaptive growth, where we're just going to see more and more people continue to use it and adopt it. And the way it works is, you can think about this with your own life, and I like to use my example. When I first got into Bitcoin, I went from 0 to about 0.25% exposure, because I was still kind of trying to figure out what this thing was. And then I went to like 1% exposure, and then it grew, and then it crashed and all this kind of stuff. And then the more you understand it, and you see this, I see this with Bitcoiners all over the world, they get more and more comfortable with it. They get more and more comfortable with the inevitability of Bitcoin over time, and they put more and more of their life savings into it. They transfer their purchasing power from the fiat network to the Bitcoin network, and they start to live on a Bitcoin standard. And now I know lots of people who are just completely on a Bitcoin standard. They're out of the fiat system as much as possible. One great tool I'm sure you heard about is Jack Mallers with Strike. They have this bill pay feature that's at least available in the United States now. You literally get your paycheck directly put into it goes to Strike. It gets instantly converted into Bitcoin, and then you can put all of your bill payment data in, and then it just, whenever a bill comes due, it instantly converts that Bitcoin back to dollars quickly, instantly, and then pays those bills. So you can live on a Bitcoin standard effectively. What does that mean as more of the world starts to do this, and as the world transition to a Bitcoin standard? I think it's going to be awesome. And I don't speak in hyperbole. I get very emotional and excited, but I don't speak in hyperbole. I try to say things that I think are accurate and true. I think that life on a Bitcoin standard, I think we're at a pivotal point in humanity, like we were 500 years ago with the invention of the printing press and the whole industrial renaissance and revolution. All of that changed humanity, and humanity pivoted from kind of the dark ages to moving to the cities, to do factories, to railroads and cars and airplanes. Everything we've seen in the last 500 years was a defined pivot. I think we're at another pivot point in humanity where we're transitioning from the analog world to the digital age. And obviously the internet is what is helping to in personal computers and all that kind of stuff. And AI is all a part of that. And Bitcoin is now the money for this new world of humanity. What it does, because fiat currency, you can just basically say, what does fiat currency incentivize? It incentivizes short-term behavior because it loses its purchasing power quickly. You want to get rid of it as quickly as possible and speculate in other things. It creates desperation in people. People are anxious. They're depressed. There's massive opioid abuse in the United States. The suicide rate is spiking, especially among my age of people who are just giving up on life, killing themselves because they don't have hope for the future. People, they feel like they're hamsters on a treadmill working harder and harder and harder and harder, and they can't pay their bills. And so it puts them in a desperate situation. Desperate people do desperate things. So they do things like buy meme stocks and crypto tokens called fart coin and whatever dumb dog coin, whatever thing is the popular coin for the day, because they're desperate. They just want anything to give them a lottery ticket so they can get out of this hellhole that they're in, this terrible position that they're in. All of that is because of this fiat currency system. This income inequality that's reached epic proportions is because of the fiat currency system and the credit-based system. The whole deal, like if you are an owner class, you're doing well. If you're in the renter class, you're struggling to survive. Bitcoin closes that gap. Because it's a proof of work system, it basically is a different world where if you're willing to put the work in, you're willing to save and to spend less than you make and save the rest in this proof of work, decentralized, secure, neutral energy money called Bitcoin, you will do well over time. And it's a different world. If you can start looking instead of in the short term, like I gotta figure out how to speculate to earn a little bit more purchasing power this month. If you can look 5, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years out into the future, you can build a much better world doing that. You can do things, I call it the age of legends. So I think we are at the cusp of the age of legends where artists will be celebrated. If you can do things like, I live in a neighborhood where we have tract houses, right? Where every house looks the same and they're all made with cheap construction material. You can go back to kind of like Italy in the 1500s and build beautiful structures. You can take 50 years to build something beautiful. You can go explore space if you want to. You can do amazing things because you have this confidence of your purchasing power is going to hold into the future, and you have enough purchasing power for yourself and for your kids and for your grandkids. Or maybe you're at a church and you can think about missions for the next 100 years without getting concerned. All of these kind of things, they just change the mindset. And it really is. I think that the world 100 years from now is not going to look anything like the world does today or like it did 100 years ago. It's going to be almost a complete shift for humanity into this new digital age and into this new age of legend. So I'm personally very excited about it. I think the people who are not excited about it are people who benefit off of the proof of stake system. So huge governments and government officials will not like the new world, the new Bitcoin standard world. People who are dependent on the government, people who don't like to do proof of work, who want to just somehow know the right people or do something in order to get free money. Those people won't like the new system. It's going to be a very different world. So there will be winners and losers, though. Not everybody wins. But I think it's a better world for most of humanity. And I'm very excited about seeing the progress over the next 10 and 20 years.
I love that a lot. And you also in the beginning you said something really interesting with like you have to pay God first and then yourself a second and then you pay the rest of the bills. And I know there are a lot of people that make a connection from Bitcoin to God. There's like the God Bless Bitcoin movement in the book, and there are other books around that topic. Do you also see kind of an similar connection there, or how do you address that topic?
I have funny feelings about that as a Christian. I think here's what really bothers me is I see people who actually worship Bitcoin. And at first it seems like a joke, but many people I've had private conversations with them. They literally view Bitcoin as God and worship Bitcoin. And I look back as a person who spent my life, reading the Bible and looking at history. I think it's so amazing to me that people used to worship idols and they used to treat these things, these gold statues, as God. To me, that's just incredible. And I know that people think I'm crazy personally just for believing in God in the first place, but that's a whole different subject. But when I see people worshiping Bitcoin as God, I get very concerned. That's not what it is. It's a tool. It's an invention. It's incredible, and it's going to change the world. But it's not a God to be worshipped. That's how I look at it. I get a little uneasy. In fact, I'm in those videos, the God Bless Bitcoin video and things like that. It doesn't sit right with me in a lot of ways. I don't think it was handed down by God either. I think it was just the progress of humanity and an amazing invention, and we should celebrate that, and that's awesome. And as a Christian, what I like about it is that it's fair and honest money. That's kind of my main thing. And I used to speak at the Thank God for Bitcoin conference and things like that and support that, because I think that if God were to have a money for his people, he would want it to be fair and honest money that doesn't take advantage of other people, that you don't have the Cantillon effect where if you know the right politicians or know, JP Morgan or, Jamie Dimon personally, you have more access to the money printer. That's unfair and it's unjust. But Bitcoin is a much fair because it's an open source, neutral energy money. Everyone can see the transactions. It's a fair unit of account for the world. To me, that is a more godly form of money. Christians should be super excited about it. Anyone who has moral values should love Bitcoin because it's a fair money. So that's kind of the extent I think about it as a Christian. It's the most sort of moral and the most ethical form of money for the world. And I think that will incentivize a much more moral and ethical world in the age to come.
Yeah, it's also interesting how, like, first of all, I totally agree with you that Bitcoin is a tool, it's money. But it's interesting how people first make it religious and second put their values on top of Bitcoin, and then expect that every Bitcoin has to be the same way.
Yes.
It is done with the carnivore diet, it's done with all the other things, and those are great things. Like, don't get me wrong, but it's like, just because you are a Bitcoiner and you project that values onto Bitcoin, and it's because it's such a big thing in your life, doesn't mean that every Bitcoiner has to be like that. And there's a lot of things like that.
Right. It's just you use the word tool. It's just a tool. You can use it for good or bad. Right. You can take a hammer and you can pound a nail with it, or you can kill a person with it. It doesn't make that hammer good or bad. It's just a neutral tool. And so I look at Bitcoin as exactly the same. It's just this neutral, inanimate tool. Anyways, we don't have to keep talking about that, but yeah, people make too much of it, I think, even though I think the implications of this new invention are profound for the world. You got to be careful how much you put into it.
100%. One topic that I wanted to discuss already earlier, but I really want to get it in the podcast because we are connected on Primal or on Nostra. I just use Primal. I don't even know if you're using Primal. And you switched off Twitter. Right, I think completely. I think the account that you had before is not even findable anymore. So you use only Nostra. What did motivate you to go to that step, and also what kind of challenges did you see right now?
Yeah, so good question. I look at Nostr. First of all, it's in its early days. So for people who don't know, it's basically kind of, and I'm not a technical person at all, so it's hard for me to explain it correctly. But it's basically a new social media protocol. It's an open source protocol for the world, and you can build different clients on top of that to access that protocol. And so we both use Primal. I've also used Damus or Damus is another one. There are many. The Amethyst is another one. There's several different clients that you can use on top of it in order to access it. And it feels kind of like Twitter. It has sort of an Instagram or maybe Facebook feel as well, but it mostly has kind of a Twitter feel. That's because of the applications that are built on top of it or the clients built on top of it. You can make it feel kind of how you want it to feel depending on the developers. What I like about it is because it's open source, what that means is you control your identity and your information. So when you sign up for Twitter or Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, anything else, those are centralized agencies that they get your demographic information and then they control the algorithms as well. So their goal is to get you to use their application. Yeah, there it is. So yeah, that's my profile. If you guys want to find me, it's Dr. Jeff at primal.net. It feels and looks a lot like Twitter. But the huge difference is Twitter does not own my information. I don't have to do anything in order to stay on their platform. I was pretty actively involved on Twitter. I had like 98,000 followers or something like that before I nuked it. And one of the benefits of that was I would post things, and based on the amount of interaction I would get with my posts, I would get paid every 2 weeks. So Twitter pays its influencers. That was a nice feature, right? I would just take that and buy sats with it, and it was pretty neat. But it incentivizes you. All of this incentivizes Twitter and the other social media platforms to get their users as locked in as possible. So the algorithms get you to spend as much time as possible. I noticed personally that I was getting it was before the presidential election, so I was getting extremely stressed out, right? Like you hear these really wild stories, and the most crazy stories that evoke the most emotions tend to get the most impressions. And it's by design. And so, I was listening to Jack Dorsey talk about it at some of the conferences. He was like, it's basically social worldwide mind control. And that sounds kind of crazy to talk about, but these people literally control the algorithms of what you see and what you don't see. We lived through the COVID time period, and I'm a doctor. And if you happen to say anything that contradicted the government narrative of vaccines and social distancing and all that if you questioned it, you were deplatformed. They would literally shut you off and shut you down. And I'm like, that's really terrible, right? As a scientist, if you can't question the science openly without repercussions, without threats of violence, without getting shut down and cut off, that's not science. That's propaganda at that point. And so what I like about this is basically free speech. So in the same way that Bitcoin is open source value for the world, or just an open source money for the world, I think of Nostra as open source free speech for the world. You control the narrative, you control the algorithm. It's definitely clunky, right? So if you come over and want to try it, and I suggest everybody do it, but I think everybody should have, just like everybody should own Bitcoin, I think everybody should try Nostra, at least get a profile on Nostra and start to use it. The experience is not as good as Twitter or X as it was, but it's getting better rapidly. So it's early days, but getting better. Primal, as you mentioned, we're both on Primal. They just came out with Primal 2.0, a much better experience. It's pretty smooth. It's still kind of harder to navigate than Twitter. They still don't have spaces yet. They have equivalents, but they're sort of hard to get to. Things like Nostr nests and other things are like Twitter Spaces, but you don't see them as easily. They're harder to access. There are downsides to that, but they're building on that, and I think they will be better and better over the coming years. So it's fun to be a part of this new movement. What kills me is I'm not a developer. I don't know how to code. I have nothing to contribute of value. And so I just kind of complain about, oh, I wish we had this, and it would be nice if we had this feature and things like that. But there are true people who are open source developers who are putting in the work. And then one last thing I'll say that's just amazing about Nostr, and I didn't think about it that much until I actually got on and started doing it. Every Nostr client has, or you can find ways to do this. You have basically a Bitcoin hot wallet attached to your account. So what, instead of just liking tweets or liking a post or loving it or giving a thumbs up, whatever, you actually can give people Satoshis. So if you like a post, instead of just giving them a thumbs up, you can actually zap somebody, is the term. You can zap somebody 1,000 sats or 10,000 sats or a whole Bitcoin if you want to. You can do whatever you want. So there's a different ethos over on Nostr of a value for value. If I provide a valuable content in a post that I post, or say, Robin, you put up a new interview with somebody who's fantastic. What I do, if I see that and I like that and I derive value from it, I can zap you and basically give you a tip of Satoshis that goes just right into your account instantly. Nobody can stop it. It's permissionless. And that's incredible. And so what it does, instead of fostering this thing where, like Twitter does, where it encourages influencers to just basically say the most crazy, outlandish thing in order to generate more impressions, now you have to actually provide value. And if you provide value, you're rewarded for that through actual Bitcoin, which is an amazing feature, I think. And so anyways, my last thing is everybody should get an Nostr account. Even if it's clunky to use now, it's getting better rapidly. And I think it will eventually replace all of these centralized social medias that we're currently used to.
Absolutely, and I can also recommend Primal. It's a great place. I had demos a year ago, or like 1.5 years ago. I think almost 2 years ago now. Time flies by. And I turned it on. I had it for a week, and then I was like, that's too clunky. I don't want to get involved with that. Then I tried this year Primal, and it was really good. Like I really liked the experience there, and I was like, that's way better. That development like 1 or 2 years in between, that was way better. I also got today actually the Primal OG badge. I was like, okay,
Yeah, right.
$20. I will take that. If Primal gets really big, I'd have that badge that I was in 2024
Yes.
there. And I also saw you got it. But yeah, it's a neat thing. Also, one thing that I want to add, as a podcaster, you distribute your podcast everywhere. Like I'm on Spotify, I'm on Apple Podcast, I'm on Fountain, I'm on Twitter, YouTube, like literally everywhere you can listen to a podcast or a long form video, I am there. And you get comments everywhere. Like people comment on Spotify, people comment on YouTube, and it's really like I have to check so many apps if I really want to get to every comment. And now on Fountain, my podcast is also, and with Fountain it's automatically on Nostra also, because they now have an integration of Nostra with Fountain, which was my first real big nice moment for Nostra, because now if someone comments on Nostra, I can reply to that, and that's automatic on Primal also. And so it's a little bit like you get a reply on YouTube, you reply to it, then later you log on Twitter, he replied back to your reply, and you can continue the conversation on Twitter, which I don't know if anyone agrees with that, but I think that's the single best feature about Nostra. That's the best for me as a content creator, because I just have to put out one thing, and I upload now my video on 5 different platforms. So I have to upload the same thing with the same title, same description, same thing 5 times next to each other. It's a real clunky thing, and that's why I have the best internet connection that I got in my region. and it's really nice to have Nostra. That could be, and I hope that could be the next mainstream thing where everyone is on there. But it's a long way still to go there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and you might, I don't know if you do that already, but have you heard of Zapstream?
I heard about it, but I didn't use it till now.
Yeah, so you can actually, it's like YouTube, you can create video content and post it, and it does the same thing. Because it's on this whole open source protocol, it goes across all these other different clients, and you can use it. And then you can get zapped in real time, or if people come and watch you later, they can actually send zaps to you for the production, which is kind of neat. So it's just a different, instead of the advertising model and the impressions model that most social media platforms currently use, where you're beholden to the advertisers. If you put out good content, people will send you Bitcoin for it. And to me, that's a more pure way of doing it. And it's more of a value for value kind of arrangement. And I think it's great.
Really cool. Absolutely. I agree with that. One question that each and every one of my guests get is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Ooh. Well, I'm old. I've been around the block, so I've done, I think, kind of a lot of things. It's sort of funny, but every once in a while I get kind of sick of talking about Bitcoin and macro because it's basically all I talk about. But I like a lot of other things too, right? I really like I used to want to be a counselor back in the day. So I love to sort of counsel people and have like authentic relationships with people. It's hard to do that on social media. But that's something I really enjoy. I'm a physician and I do something called radiology, and I used to be an interventional radiologist, which is sort of the surgery side of medicine and radiology. I like talking about all that. I love talking about the broken healthcare system. It's very broken in America, and all doctors understand that, but we're not in charge, so we can't change it the way we want it, and that's very frustrating. Similar to how the education system is broken, to how the military is broken. I like talking about all of those kind of things. I think what it gets down to me is I just love learning, and I try to encourage people. I say always be learning. Like, I think if you are always learning, you will succeed in life. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll be rich, but you will have success. You will enjoy life more. You enjoy people more. It's fun to get interested in what other people are doing. And so I would just encourage people to just learn about other stuff, like get to know people and get to know what they're doing. And anytime anybody wants to talk to me about that, like, I don't have to talk about macro and Bitcoin. There's a lot of other things I like talking about. So that's a very long answer to say I'm interested in so many different things, and I'm always happy to talk about other things if people want to reach out.
Absolutely. We can do it in our second round and get some other topics in because we covered all the basics right now. Really cool. We have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. It's a simple question. Have you ever seen a Bitcoin mining rig in real life?
Yeah. At conferences, I've seen them. I haven't seen them. I've never been to... I've personally seen them. I've seen individual ones in different spots. I've never been to like a public miner to see, a huge mining operation. But yes, I've definitely seen individual units from different friends and acquaintances.
Absolutely.
I don't want to say too much, but yes, I've seen them. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I usually ask in the last part of the podcast, where can people find you? But I think we already covered that and also showed your profile. So people can find you on Primal. I guess that's also the best place to find and reach out to you.
Yep, that is. Yeah, that's actually the only place I am now. I've consolidated everything to just Nostr. And then, I run a friends and family hedge fund as well. It's called Valuation Partners. So if people are interested in that, I'm not even looking for clients anymore. I'm not looking for patients. I don't have an audience to grow. I don't really care. I just like kind of sharing what I know with people. And if people have stuff they want to share in return, that's great. So I appreciate what you do, Robin. I mean, you're educating the world about an amazing new technology. And it takes a lot of time and effort to do what you do. So thanks for what you do.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that a lot. Thank you so much also for taking the time. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye.